Let's talk about why I personally made the decision to move from Holland to Sweden. First things first, why did we choose Sweden? Well, in the year 2000, me and my parents wanted to go on a vacation during the summer. Most of the time we went on vacations to Germany, Belgium or France. And we have done some bicycle vacations. But this year, the year 2000, it seemed to be bad weather everywhere. Bad weather in Germany, Belgium or France. So we thought, well, if it's going to be bad weather anyway, why not go to Sweden? Because we were thinking that it was always bad weather in Sweden. So we decided to go to Sweden, and that year we had the warmest year in a long time. For Sweden, that is. It was at least 30 degrees Celsius the entire vacation. That started our adventures in Sweden. We had, from that point on, we basically always went on our vacations to Sweden because we basically fell in love with the country. We did a lot of bicycle vacations in Sweden, but in the year 2005, my parents decided to buy a vacation house in Sweden. Once this vacation home was purchased, we spent a lot of time in this house, renovating it and making it the way we wanted it to be. And 7 years later, in the year 2012, my parents had decided that they wanted to move to Sweden. And I was in my last year of university, or in Dutch called hogeschool. During my last year of university, my parents asked me if I wanted to come with them to Sweden. And I had to think about that for a while. Now, at this time, I was 24, I think, and was still living at my parents'. This was because my parents were extremely nice and decided that I could stay living with them while I was studying so that I would have a good economical start. But if I were to move with them to Sweden, that meant I would have to live in their house for a lot longer. And by this time I was already thinking about moving out at some point. So moving to Sweden would mean for me that I wouldn't move out of the house for a while more. I did have some money saved up, but not enough to buy myself a house. So if I were to stay in Holland, I would probably end up renting a little apartment. And also looking around me, looking at my friends, how my friends were doing when they had moved out already. My friends were having a very difficult time economically speaking. They either had to live together, like I had a couple of friends that together were renting a house, the 7 of them, so 7 people renting one house, or renting an apartment together, 2 people in a very small 1 or 2 room apartment. I even had a friend that was a veterinarian assistant, which is a pretty good job, but he was living in a 1 room apartment, and because he just couldn't pay the rent and the taxes anymore in Holland, he had to move back to his parents, and he was 35. So looking at the economical and housing situation in Holland, I didn't see it as a great option. Now, the next thing was that, yes, I was doing a university degree, but it would be 80% sure I wouldn't get the job that I studied for. I would probably just end up at McDonald's or something like that. So that didn't look great either. Now, looking at Sweden, I didn't really know what the economics were like in Sweden, but I did know I loved the country. I loved the nature in Sweden. It was a beautiful country, and the people seemed to be a lot more laid back and less stressed out than they were back in Holland. I really enjoyed going to Sweden. So since I was studying to become an engineer in university, and my parents asked me to move to Sweden with them during my last year, this was a good moment for me to leave Holland behind and start a new life somewhere else. Now you might be asking, what about friends and family? Well, I had a lot of friends in Holland, but during my last 2 years at university, I was constantly studying and not doing much else. So during a period like that, you naturally already hang out less and less with your friends. They were going through the same kind of situation. So this was also a very natural moment to make a big change in my life. So I decided to move to Sweden. I said yes to my parents and I want to come with them to Sweden. And they told me, that's great. We'll wait until you're done studying at university before we move. Now, without my parents knowing this and me discovering a bit later, this would put a lot of stress on me. The last year of university is already a very stressful period in anybody's life. But now I had to think about not only clearing the exams, but if I didn't clear the exams, we couldn't move to Sweden. So I felt the stress of having to clear the exams, not only because it would be nice to clear exams, but any delay in me having to redo exams would mean that we couldn't move to Sweden yet. And sadly, this is exactly what happened. I did pretty well on my exams, but there were a few that I had to do over, which meant there was a bit of a delay before we could move to Sweden. But once I cleared the exams, we only waited for 2 more months until we started moving all kinds of stuff and belongings to Sweden. So in the year 2012, on February, we officially moved to Sweden. Once we had moved to Sweden, of course, we were renovating the house in such a way that we could live there more permanently, because remember, up to this point, it was just a vacation house. So we renovated the house so that we lived there permanently, and now the next part came. I needed to get a job. Getting a job in Sweden was far, far from easy. It actually took me 2 years, 2 full years, to get my first permanent job in Sweden. I had some small temporary jobs here and there, but the biggest problems was that I didn't learn Swedish before I moved to Sweden, because remember, I was studying in the university before that, so I didn't have time to study another language. So I started learning Swedish while in Sweden. And this was one of several reasons why it was pretty hard to get a job. Also, because of certain circumstances out of our control, it was really hard to get a person's number. And without a person's number here in Sweden, you can basically do nothing. They need your person's number for almost everything, including getting a job. So for somebody that did not have a person's number and barely spoke the language, it took me 2 years. 2 years to get my first job. And during those 2 years, almost all my savings disappeared. But finally, after 2 years, I got a good job. A job that wasn't the greatest, but I still have that same job today. And it allowed me to save up enough money to buy my own house. We found an old church, not too far away from my parents, and this church I got to buy so cheap that we couldn't say no. So we bought it, renovated it so that I could live in it, and now I permanently live in Sweden. I haven't looked back. There was a very tough period in the first 2.5 years in Sweden. It wasn't easy at all. But since that day, in February 2012, when we left Holland for the last time, I have not been back in Holland. I have stayed in Sweden, and I don't regret it. I think I will live here for a very long time. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next episode. Bye! YouTube says you might enjoy this video. Go ahead and give it a try.